Hαίrete, friends. Welcome to Classics in Color, a weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Mark Graves, and today we're going to be talking about some of the most complicated punishments known to the Roman Empire that created a delightful intersection between humanity's most beloved pastimes, murder and the theater. Let's get started. Punishment in ancient Rome differed quite a bit from what we are used to nowadays, both practically and philosophically. Practically, they had no interest in and no infrastructure for holding people for decades at a time in prison. So if they wanted to punish someone severely and permanently, then they would resort to things like banishment, chopping off limbs, and straight-up execution. In the modern world, we send very few people to death row. It's a long and arduous process to get them there, and there's ongoing debate about whether or not we should be doing that at all. The Romans had no such qualms. They tortured and executed vast numbers of people on a regular basis, partly because they were less motivated by a sense of serving some abstract form of justice and more interested in causing alleged criminals as much pain and humiliation as possible in order to, one, deter future offenses, and two, to flex the power and status of the Roman emperor and in some cases of the wronged party. Not to mention, the Romans loved to try to fit the punishment to the crime. So, for example, the Roman 12 Tables of Law prescribe that someone convicted of arson should be executed via cremation. We also have a lovely passage from Suetonius that talks about when Galba was a governor and some of the punishments that he came up with. For he cut off the hands of a moneylender who carried on his business dishonestly and nailed them to his counter. He crucified a man for poisoning his ward, whose property he was to inherit in case of his death. And when the man invoked the law and declared that he was a Roman citizen, Galba, pretending to lighten his punishment by some consolation and honor, ordered that a cross much higher than the rest and painted white be set up, and the man transferred to it. So clearly the Romans were having a ton of fun and exercising an astonishing amount of creativity when it came to coming up with these punishments. But the peak of this creativity comes in when they would orchestrate performances out of these public executions that they would put on. So typically they would pick a myth, usually one with violent and gory things happening in it, and then they would dress up the victims in costumes of characters from this myth, and they would then set things up so that the victims would be maimed or murdered in accordance with the plot of the myth. So to illustrate this, we're going to take a look at a quote from Tertullian. He is a later Christian writer expressing horror at these shows that the pagan Romans would put on. You pagans really are still more religious in the amphitheater, where over human blood, over the dirt of pollution of capital punishment, your gods dance, supplying plots and themes for the guilty. Unless it is that often the guilty play the parts of the gods. We have seen at one time or other Attis, that god from Pessinus, being castrated, and a man who was being burned alive had been rigged out as Hercules. We have laughed amid the noon's blend of cruelty and absurdity, at Mercury using his burning iron to see who was dead. So those are some horrible things to do to people. Perhaps my favorite passage describing one of these displays comes from Apuleius' Metamorphoses. So the premise of this novel is that a man has been turned into a donkey and he goes on various misadventures trying to deal with that fact and hopefully find a cure. So near the end of the novel, he has been acquired by one of these stadiums that is supposed to put on these public punishment displays. So he's sitting in the wings waiting for his turn, and he gets to watch this really elaborate performance of the Judgment of Paris. Apuleius describes it in detail. It sounds beautiful, but the donkey is getting very nervous about his turn that's coming up. Let's look at the passage. And now a soldier came hurrying across the theater floor in answer to the audience's demands, to fetch the woman from the public prison, the one who I told you had been condemned to the beasts for her manifold crimes, and engaged to make an illustrious match with me. And now, a bed, evidently meant to serve as our honeymoon couch, was being elaborately made up, shining with Indian tortoiseshell, piled high with a feathered mattress, and spread with a flowery silk coverlet. But as for me, besides my shame at indulging in sexual intercourse in public, besides the contagion of this damnable polluted woman, I was greatly tormented by the fear of death. For I thought to myself that when we were in fact fastened together in Venus's embrace, any wild animal that might be led in to slaughter the woman could not possibly turn out to be so intelligently clever, or so skillfully educated, or so temperately moderate as to mangle the woman lying attached to my loins while sparing me on the grounds that I was unconvicted and innocent. So now I was afraid not for my honor, but for my very life. So there you have it, folks. Death by getting your face ripped off by a bear while being raped by a donkey. The Romans clearly at their best. My major source for this video was an article entitled Fatal Charades, Roman Executions Staged as Mythological Enactments by K.M. Coleman. Please check that out if you're interested in learning more about this topic. Thank you so much for watching this video. Special thank you as always to subscribers and to Patreon members, and I hope to see all of you again next week. Hαίrete.